Welcome to Rune Soup, a podcast about magic, culture, and the paranormal, coming to you from... My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. Enjoy. Today on Rune Soup, we are speaking with Lucy AitkenRead. Lucy is a writer, video blogger, and off-grid homesteader. She is the author of several books, including 30 Days of Rewilding, and is the first guest to record an episode of the podcast from inside a yurt. Lucy, welcome aboard.
Hi, it's great to be here.
All right, okay. I'm quite looking forward to the answer to traditional question one, Lucy. Were you a weird kid?
Yeah, I really was, but is that not just a second child thing?
It could be. On a show like this, people tend to fall into categories of I grew up with comics, I was raised by a librarian, I grew up in the woods. It's usually, by the time you end up on a show like this, it's something like I had a lot of imaginary friends and I was basically covered in mud till I was 18 or something like that.
Well, funnily enough, I was brought up by ministers, so, that probably makes me strange. So full-time ministers, and we moved kind of nomadically every 3 years for them to follow their calling. So you can probably imagine that would have led to a pretty interesting childhood.
Yeah.
But we were always in the city, though, and actually I was a hippie even back in my childhood, but I was living in the city. So maybe that dichotomy, made me a little special.
Well, it certainly, it gives you something to aim for. So what towns are we talking about? What towns, if you moved every 3 years, where are we really looking here?
So I was actually born in Newcastle in the north of England, which makes me a Geordie.
Oh, that's nice. I was born in Newcastle, Australia, so we're like weird cousins.
Wow, yeah, we're like Newcastle twin babies. And then I lived in another northern town called Hull, which you traditionally pronounce Hull with the accent. And then we moved to London. And so I turned up in my London school where everybody spoke with a very strong Cockney Jamaican accent with a very broad Northern accent. And I actually had to change schools because I couldn't understand my teacher and she couldn't understand me.
Wow, that's that's impressive. So
yeah.
Well, I mean, one of the questions, because I've been following your blog for a bit. One of the questions I was going to ask was, in fact, why London? But that sort of answered it for me. But yeah, well, let's take that story because there's other bits to your accent now.
Yeah, the accent.
All right, so in between leaving that school and, where did you go from there?
So we were in London until I was 13. So my accent is probably mostly still London, I think. And then when I was 13, I moved down to the south coast of England and lived there for 4 years and then moved to New Zealand. So I moved to New Zealand 5 years, and then I moved to New Zealand when I was 18.
Did you do that with your family, or did you say, do you know what, I'm going to go to New Zealand?
Well, they went to New Zealand and left me, and I finished my exams and then went to New Zealand to join them for a little holiday. And the holiday turned into 7 years.
A somewhat similar thing happened to me. I went to New Zealand only planning to spend a year, and it took 7 years of my life. It goes quick.
It is like that, New Zealand. I think it grips you by the heart, and it kind of doesn't really let you go.
So what were your first impressions?
So I flew into Wellington, and I was immediately struck by the expansiveness, I suppose, of the blue sky and the landscape and the hills. It was probably, very geographic, I think. I also made some quick friends, and I think that always helps you when you're new in a place to kind of start immediately feeling at home. I had no idea really what it was that did grab my heart. It was probably more mystical than anything.
Yeah, it can certainly do that. I know precisely what you mean about Wellington. I don't know if you've seen the poetry book Big Weather, which is poems about Wellington. But my first impression
Yeah.
of the place was because I drove in rather than flying. I'd moved to Auckland, and my flatmate was a jewelry designer in Auckland, and she was coming down for. She's a market trader. She was coming down to trade, and it's quite vertical driving into Wellington from the north. Like the hills are sort of well, houses are perched on hills, and there's a sort of
Yeah.
verticality that isn't there, and then it opens up and you see the giant harbour, and it's a place of. It's a silly place for a city. Put it that way. It's yeah,
Totally on a fault line.
yeah, with
A
crazy
dead end on a
with
fault
crazy
line.
Antarctic weather, and that really sort of situates it in people's minds and in its literature. It's this place that is just very big.
Yeah.
So is it mostly in Wellington on this trip? Because I note that where you live now is quite a bit further north.
Well, a- actually, it wasn't even quite what was Lower Hutt, the Hutt Valley, which is, kind of Bougainville. But I loved the Hutt Valley. I studied at Victoria, so I would get the train into Wellington every day. But I lived in the Hutt Valley and loved it. And when I met my husband, and then we kind of lived a little while in England, we always actually thought we'd move back to the Hutt Valley because it's just a really cool, lots of great community and good stuff going on there. And we always thought we'd live there. Um, and yeah, then things changed, and oh, the whims of the heart. Now we live in the Karangahaki Gorge, which is just at the base of the Coromandel.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get to that bit. But how did you? What was the decision making process that led you to go back to London? Can you blame your husband for that?
Yeah, well, because he had to meet my family, didn't he? So, despite assuring him that I never wanted to leave New Zealand, after a year of marriage, I managed to convince him to come back and just spend a little while getting to know my family. And my sister was pregnant, and I wanted to, be there. It was the first baby in the family, and I wanted to be there for that, and wanted Tim to fall in love with them all and them all to fall in love with Tim. And they did, and it went really well. And it went so well that we stayed there for 7 years.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons I wanted to get you on the show because I just finished up 8 years, and I can kind of blame my Kiwi partner for it as well. It was his idea. Said, well, why don't we go to London? At the end of, I just finished up a job in Auckland. He said, why don't we go to London? I'm like, yeah, whatever. And that went quick as well. And it
Yeah.
kind of, 8 years later. But I mean, this is where I think I first found you because I worked I worked for a company called Quip and then Yelp when I was in London, and the editorial team was very into craft and sort of makers movement stuff to do with design and so on. And I think I found your blog through them. But was that? I mean, is that something that's? You said you were kind of probably always a hippie. Is that something that's always been there for you, or is it something you kind of discovered and gravitated towards?
I've always been a maker, for sure. They say that if you, as an adult, can't figure out what you should be doing with your life, you should look back around the age of 10 and see what you were doing with all your spare time back then. And when I was 10, I was just making the most random things and drawing people on every scrap of paper. I can remember that I had a little necklace that I made for myself, and I wore it probably for 3 years. I don't know what my family thought of it, but it was just, you know, cans of drink, the little pull tags of a
Yep.
can, and I had just threaded them all onto like a bit of string. It was probably
So you were wearing that when
a funny little
you were wearing
contraption.
that at the age of 13.
Between 10 and 13, that's kind of what I wore. I just, yeah, wore a lot of jewelry that I made, and, did other bizarre things like I kind of modeled myself. Do you remember Absolutely
Of course.
Fabulous? Yeah, so they were my heroes, and me and my best friend basically styled ourselves on them. So we wore flares, and every mufti day at school, we'd be the ones turning up dressed exactly like that pair and falling all over the place. Yes, I wore that little necklace, I think, as part of that hippie expression back then. So yeah, I was making from a really young age.
Nice. Here's a weird question about moving back to London in your case. When I moved after 7 years in New Zealand, I think I'd been in New Zealand long enough to more or less go native because I kind of almost, I think I identified as Kiwi. I think I sort of had a Kiwi view of the world when I showed up. Was that something? I mean, what was the process of kind of rediscovering London, I guess specifically, after so long away? Did you see it with foreign eyes, or did it feel like coming home?
Definitely, I brought the Kiwiness with me, and I can remember landing and walking down the street, and a little old lady passed me, and I just beamed at her and was like, "Hi," and she pulled her coat in close and stepped to the side of the pavement to give me a really wide berth, and I was like, "Oh yeah, welcome to London."
And I presume you weren't still wearing the bottle cap necklace at the time because maybe she thought, here's a homeless lady attacking me.
Yeah, yeah, probably she could have, but no, I probably looked quite normal, in whatever normal means.
And so, was the plan a number of years in London from the beginning, or were you kind of tricking Tim into, oh, we'll just do a year and then sort of life happens?
There was no trick, but we did have in mind that it might just be for a year, but we would kind of see how it goes. In fact, I think it was even 6 months. And one of the funny things, you get married and you're still in that stage of trying to figure out what you're going to do. Well, we were anyway. And we said to each other, okay, we want to do something really different with our lives. We don't just want to stay here and carry on this path. So whatever opportunity that next comes up, that is around a 6 month kind of time frame, we'll just do that. And we had that conversation, and then Tim came with me to get the train into Wellington because I was just finishing my degree, and we just stood there and read this sign together that said, "If you jump onto the tracks, you'll spend 6 months in prison." We just thought it was quite funny. So yeah, we actually had in mind that we might spend 6 months backpacking to London and then maybe 6 months in London, and probably head back to New Zealand after that. But that didn't happen.
So what did happen? How did you get from a plan of 6 months to having that amazing place in Peckham? It was Peckham, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was
Camberwell,
Camberwell.
sorry.
So
Yeah.
it's in New Zealand it would be the same town, but in
No,
London,
and
they're 6 minutes
when you're
away.
south of the river, you got to be very specific about where you're from too. So yes.
Well, so Peckham was our closest train station. So I guess that's the symbol of that area, because Camberwell doesn't. You can only get to it on a bus, but we were technically in Camberwell.
And so how did all that happen? Because that's where, as I said, I had your blog introduced to me, and it's sort of a remarkable journey of what you did there. But I don't actually know how you got into doing that.
Oh, we just did what we always do, and we just fell completely head over heels in love with exactly the place where we found ourselves. And so we landed in London, and we loved the energy of that city, and I began to reacquaint myself with the parts of London that I really loved as a kid, and a lot of my friends were there, so we began kind of rebuilding those friendships that I'd left as a child. And yeah, we just fell absolutely in love with it, and just kept on staying.
It's kind of a big project, though. I mean, I was there 8 years, and we rented the whole time, and certainly didn't do anything to, brutify the landlord's house. But you guys, I mean, by the time you left, if obviously the blog will be linked up in the show notes, but by the time you left, it was a kind of remarkable change.
Yeah, we count ourselves as being incredibly lucky to ever own a home in South London, but we did manage to do that. And when our first night in there, we actually cried because we lay in our bed and the walls were disgusting, and it all smelled like 50 years of smoking, which, had happened. And the night bus went past and idled at the traffic lights right outside of our home, and our entire home shook with this bus. And we just kind of gripped each other and cried and said, "What have we done?" We just felt like it was a grave error. And then we were focused on just having Ramona. I was pregnant when we moved into that house. So then we just were like, okay, let's, forget about the house. Let's not worry about it too much. We'll just have a baby, and, she'll take all of our focus, and we won't have to worry about the fact that we live in a squatty home with a night bus that goes all night and idles every 8 minutes. But I think what happened, I had Ramona, and I had this huge renewal of creativity and energy that was definitely prompted by new motherhood, I think. I was on maternity leave for a year, and we kind of just spent that year picking up things that we found on the street and in people's bins, and just kind of upcycling them and putting them around our house. And we just had the most fun maternity leave ever, just decorating using other people's cast-offs.
You have some unbelievable luck with found objects. Whenever I tried that in London, you'd open a skip and it'd just be like a dead fox. You know.
There were a few dead things, I think, that we passed up in our time. But we did have, but I mean, to be fair, we were incredibly diligent and committed, and we would go on walks 3 or 4 times a week to, half enjoy the area and enjoy the walk, but definitely with a part hope that we might come across something really cool. And we nearly always.
Yeah. At what point? Because this is also, I'm almost asking myself this question as well. You go through that process. The house starts to look really good. The child gets a bit older. At what point did it occur to you, or was it a discussion that Tim had where you're like, do you know what? We need to think about being on the other side of the world again, because it's interesting after that much time. And it took me, I was probably in denial for about a year before we started to do the unbelievable amounts of planning and paperwork and so on that goes with doing it. But how is that for you, kind of realizing might be time to be on the other side of the world?
I think it was, yeah, similar to you. It was a slow kind of tickle in a way that just felt like it needed to be it, but it wasn't really urgent. And it was during pregnancy with Juno, so our second child. And we were just putting in a huge effort to live the way we wanted to live in New Zealand. And that desire was to live in relationship with the earth and to be connected to nature. So it was totally possible to do this in London. We became members of a little forest collective. So we got a key to a gate to a 1-acre forest in Camberwell. And we would go and spend time there with Ramona as much as possible. And every holiday we would pack all our gear, all our camping gear into rucksacks, and put Ramona in the bike seat, and we take our bikes onto the trains and go camping. So we were making a huge effort to live that way, but it did feel like it was taking all of our energy. It didn't feel as though we were able to just simply be in nature and just, what is the phrase I'm looking for? Just have an easy relationship with the earth. It felt like a struggle. And I think we got pregnant with Juno and began to think that we needed to it was so central to our lives that we actually needed to make a big move to make it easier for us.
Yeah, London.
Did any of that make
made
sense?
100% sense. London wants you to live a certain way, and it's amazing for so many years. I was quite lucky with the jobs I had got to do. I mean, the last job I had in London was working for Time Out. So, free stuff, free conferences, free concerts, and, going to all the amazing restaurants.
There's so much free stuff. There's so much. It's great.
But if you want to live a different way to the way you're kind of supposed to live in London, it's really difficult. So we didn't go quite so far as camping, but a lot of my friends are in the West Country, so I would spend as much time as possible out of the place. And there's
Yeah.
something about it's just a bit too much effort to sustain long term if there's another way you want to live. And I used to think that on the tube, because London, like all major cities, is a very young place, and you look and you don't see too many people in their 50s getting the tube,
Hmm.
because at some stage, and I completely understand this, people go, "Do you know what I don't want to do for the rest of my life? Get the tube."
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was the kind of me, because I still love London, like, I still think it's the best city on earth, but I've got it was a
Mhm.
year's process of me kind of allowing myself to think, okay, how do we make that change back?
Yeah, it's a big deal.
And was it, I mean, when you're talking about one of the priorities for you, and we certainly share this, is the increased daily engagement with the natural world. Were you thinking more or less off grid then? Or, I mean, what was the process of kind of going, well, how much nature do we want?
Yeah. Oh no, we had absolutely no idea how far we would take this. Oh my goodness, it's actually laughable. What did we have in mind? I think we would just. I think we thought we'd live in a little town in New Zealand. We'd have really easy access to the beach because you tend to have that anywhere really in New Zealand. And we would just be able to visit the beach after work and maybe the kids might find some kind of school that had a good nature loving theme or something. I think it was we were talking a bit of a change, but still fundamentally living in a beautiful old house that we would then redo using other people's stuff, but just being slightly more connected with the natural world. I don't think we ever for a moment imagined that we would go off grid. In fact, while we were living in London, some friends in New Zealand invited us to be part of a TP community in very rural New Zealand. And I actually scoffed at the idea. And I can very clearly remember saying that I don't think the world needs more of that isolationist, hippie community stuff. What they need is people who are pioneering ways to live in an earth friendly way in the city. So, that was my thinking back then, that we would just live in an earth friendly way, but with more connection with nature in a little town in New Zealand. And look at us now.
Well, yeah, I mean, how did that, was it just, tell us how you ended up, how the original plan A, became where you guys currently are?
So I think it was one of those things that amazingly, you aim for something and that does actually happen. So Juno was born, our second child, and we said, look, what we're going to do, at that stage, we owned half a VW camper van with my folks because we both loved vans and we both loved traveling. So we went halvesies on this camper van. And we said, guys, we're going to take this camper van, our beautiful camper van called Betty, we're going to take her around Europe. And we're going to take 6 months to just travel and dream and figure out what we want to do with the rest of our lives. And it's going to be a time where we're going to purposefully go out there and meet people and see what people are doing and be inspired. And by the end of that dream, by the end of that journey, we'll know what we want. And that is kind of what happened, actually. So I put on my blog, I said, we're taking our camper van Betty to Europe. Do any of you have any ideas of where we should go? And readers messaged me and made suggestions. So one said, you need to check out the Forest Kindergarten and the Black Forest in Germany. And then another said, oh, there's an amazing community in the bottom of Spain. And then we kind of were like, yeah, okay. And looked at the map and we're like, that's going to be tricky to make that work. But let's do it. So we kind of just went around Europe visiting some amazing projects. And I sit down in our life now and it cracks me up how many facets of our life were first seeded back then on that 6-month trip. And we definitely didn't finish that trip after 6 months going, oh, we know exactly what to do with our life. It wasn't at all like that. We finished the trip like, wow, I feel like we've just had a 6-month jolly and we're no closer to knowing what our dreams are. We kind of felt a little bit like that. But now I look back and I see that all the cool things in our life at the moment were planted in that 6-month trip through people we visited.
And what was the main one there? Was it just the notion that an alternative is in fact possible?
Yeah, that was a big one, but definitely off-grid. We'd never considered going off-grid. It seemed implausible, completely implausible in our London life to consider going off-grid. Like I said, I scoffed at the people doing it because I just thought it's unrealistic. Why would you even do it? It's not what the world needs. And then we visited this community in Spain called Sunseed, who are completely off-grid, completely on solar and on small amounts of solar. And they're living in community and they're rebuilding the ancient viaducts to bring water and replenish all the vegetation through the desert. So they're doing such awesome earth-loving work. But that was the first time we'd ever used a composting toilet. And through being there, we began to see the sense in having your own toilet system where you don't send your amazing human manure off away from you, but you instead use that on your land. So that was our first introduction to composting toilets. It was our first introduction to solar power and quite a few other things. And we only stayed there for 2 weeks. But that community ignited in our minds the sense of like, wow, we could actually flip and do something like this.
So does that mean by the time you returned to New Zealand, you kind of had a couple of options, like sort of let's widen it out. We may find, and although these things are very rare these days, like we may find an old farmhouse that no other people have done up yet, and that may be cheap, and we may get to do that one, but we should also keep in mind that we can do the off-grid option. Or were you, by the time you landed, going, no, I'm pretty keen on doing this the off-grid way?
No, we weren't keen on off-grid still. It hadn't kind of at all solidified in our heads. We were still feeling like we were bumbling around, not having a clue. We were adamant about one thing, and that was that we wouldn't live in community. So then we bought a bus called Bertie, a little bit like Betty. That was my child named our new bus. And we travelled around New Zealand trying to find where we would park our bus, where we would stay and look for land. And the first town we went to, we met some really cool people through my blog, actually. And they offered us to park up in their little community in our bus. And so, we were like, yeah, okay, I mean, we're never going to live in community, but we'll just do it, just to get to know these guys a little bit better. And then we didn't leave.
Yeah.
We just stayed there. And they were off-grid. And so we didn't intend, still at that stage, we didn't intend to go off-grid, but it just so happened and it felt really right that we stay with these people. And then we did a year in this off-grid farm. And at the end of that year, we were like, yep, we want to be off-grid.
Do you think that?
And we want to live in community.
Yeah. Do you think that's important? Because I know, because there'll be some questions towards the end about how people can semi-grid, because like listeners to the show are very interested in this sort of stuff and permaculture and all that kind of thing. Do you think, are you more confident in your decision after that year? And would you recommend for people who are kind of looking at this quite seriously to do something similar?
I would say to everybody considering a huge change like this to try and get the chance to live somewhere for a longer period of time than just a holiday, to see if it's a good fit for you, to see what it might bring to your life, how hard it might be, and what joy it can give you. And because I think only doing that for a year made us think, wow, we could actually do this, and wow, this is an amazing way to live.
So why is it? I mean, let's talk about that year. What are the things you really, really like about it? And what were the first things you miss? And sort of like, what are the things you still miss?
Ooh, that's a big question.
Because I imagine the first year would have been, that's the whole point of it. There's some steep learning curves there.
Yeah. Our first year was really quite hard because we were living in a tiny little place in a tiny little yurt. The yurt that we have now as our spare room, we were pretty much just living in that with an extra little caravan. And we didn't really have very much solar for the first half of that year either. And we didn't have a phone line or the internet. So we were completely and utterly off grid. Like we were completely uncontactable. My granddad died and I didn't even know about it for a day and a half because no one could get hold of me, kind of thing. So that bit was probably the hardest bit, feeling kind of isolated, actually, even though we were only 20 minutes away from town. Being uncontactable is a huge deal, you know?
Is that scary as well? Like, just to interrupt there, is that actually scary when you think, well, what if Tim's away and I break my leg or something like that?
Well, I guess that's why people often live in community, because there were 3 families on that farm. So you were never really alone.
Yeah,
So did it feel scary? It didn't feel scary. There weren't any scary moments. Yeah, but it just felt a little bit, it felt like we were doing it hard there, I think. But what did we love about it? So, you know what I love about this way of life? It is feeling like a true part of the ecosystem. And I don't, man, I'm a writer, so I kind of like need to write things down before I fully know what I mean by something. And I'm actually just using my voice now, so I don't know if I'm really going to get it across. But I love feeling like I am a part of the natural environment, that even though I'm a human and I can go on the Wi-Fi and I can make myself an espresso, more than ever in my whole life, I feel like I am somehow related to the mountain, or somehow related to the cows or the stars. And there's not any science behind that.
See, this is your first podcast turn. My whole thing is kind of disputing that, because we're largely animists around here, and I can go toe to toe with any materialist and say I think there is science behind it. But Carrie, so okay, you can push that if you're worried about sounding weird, be worried about not sounding weird enough when you talk about this stuff.
Okay, cool. That's great to hear, because actually I have written a book and it's about rewilding, and I do actually address that idea that we do actually have the natural environment coded in us. Like the mountain actually does have a presence, like in my blood cells. And I really believe that. And I feel like being disassociated with that actually affects our well-being, both physically and mentally and emotionally. And so what I have now is this real sense of connectedness and feeling like a part of that animal world. And I love it.
And this is why I thought you'd make such an excellent guest, because that's kind of exactly what people listening to the show, who are presumably on grid for the most part, would be thinking of and would be longing for in how that works, which is that particular bioregional relationship. In kind of, academic animism, the definition of it is the extension, or the idea that things other than humans are persons, so the extension of personhood, not humanness, to trees and rivers and mountains and so on, so that they actually they participate in your kind of, well, they do directly participate in local experience and local culture and so on. And that's where it is kind of, as I said, like, it's quite scientific, because the opposite argument that they aren't is this sort of materialist Cartesian assumption, which is a premise of science rather than a finding. So kind of like my long-term journey is sharing voices like this that say, no, this is genuinely, experientially how it works.
Experientially, 100%. And I'm actually really big on the experience, because I really feel like science now is giving us information from a scientific perspective that humankind has known forever. So we have known forever that what our grandparents knew and the ancients before us, what they knew, we also on some level know. And the wounds that they carried, we on some level know that. And I think that humankind we've carried that knowledge. But right now, like this year, last year, literally so recently, science has found that DNA speaking, that is true, that I carry the trauma that my grandparents went through, and I carry it like a blueprint, and I will pass it on like a blueprint. And so now the whole, science community is like, well, look, we found this. And then there's a whole bunch of us going, but we knew that.
It's funny, and it's funny with sort of a capital F or a capital M for mysterious, how like it almost seems too complete or too much like a film. Because if you look at, because the ones I think of are nutritional or microbiomal. So my grandparents played in the dirt, but we didn't. And now it turns out that that's like genuinely an essential component of building a child's immune system, and all these things that we didn't need to articulate before. And it just seems very mysterious, like metaphysically mysterious, that with each passing year, it looks like we're just sort of, and I'm open to the fact that it will change, but it looks like we're just redescribing something essential about how humans should live.
Yeah, exactly.
So speaking of like raising kids in dirt and so on, a friend of mine who's just moved back up to her family farm in northern New South Wales, she decided to make that move. They live right in the middle of Sydney. When she went up to visit her parents, so the kids' grandparents, they took all the toys and all the accoutrements that come with having a very small child. And as soon as they got there, he fled the house and didn't touch his toys for the entire long weekend, and was out playing in the garden and chasing chickens and just generally exploring. And that was for her, that's why they live up there now, that was for her the realization of, well, there's probably I don't want to say right and wrong when it comes to kids, but like, I now need to, as a mother, I need to make that a priority, because this is something that he just shone with when it happened. I mean, is there, because you're now, we're going to talk about yurts in a second, but you've now got 2 kids and a husband in a large yurt, and and is there an awareness of that? Like, do you get the kind of maternal pride of, I'm going to raise some weird kids, but I'm going to raise them really good. They're going to have good immune systems and all that, and confidence and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, they're going to have a great set of microbes. Yes. Well, funnily enough, my 6-year-old Ramona is actually still a bit of a townie. And she was the one born and raised until she was 3 in London. And she still really carries that kind of city slicker with her. And I can remember our first day on this land, we had our little yurt up, and I woke up and I was so excited. I opened the door and we look up at the mountain. It's right there, and we're surrounded by native forest. And I said to Ramona, what should we do today, Ramona? We can do anything. And I was thinking, like, she might say, go chuck stones in a river, or climb a tree, or go for a walk through the mountain. And she said, I want to go to town, and I want to go to Chipmunks, and I want to go through the drive-through. And I was like, oh no. And there's still kind of remnants of that, actually. Like, she just does really like town. And she has a pair of trainers and a pair of white socks. And when we go to town, she puts on her trainers and her white socks. And she feels really chuffed with herself. But at the same time, like your friend, I really see that my children completely bloom when they have a day just in nature. So once a week, me and all the kids on the farm go for a huge hike. Like we spend almost the whole day hiking, and we come back, and in those hours we're just all at our very best. We're just completely connected to each other. We're completely connected to ourselves, and the day is just long and wide open, and we all come home just with really full hearts. And so I really see that. And so we do try and, encourage play outdoors. We run a forest play group inspired by the forest kindergarten that we visited in the Black Forest. We just had that today. And so from 10 until 2 every Wednesday, families come. And today we had like 20 families. So we're just kids in every corner of the bush or the forest. 4 of them went into the swamp, and they were covered from head to toe in mud. And I just laughed because I was sort of like, people have no idea how muddy we get. Like, they've got no idea what kind of life we really live. I don't even put this stuff online. So we do try and create a lot of opportunities for that. But at the same time, I am a huge believer in seeing my children as fully human and fully deserving of all the rights and respect and dignity that I, as an adult, am. And for me, that means respecting their wishes and making space in our life for the things that they love. So whilst I love nature and I love what children do when they're just given a stick and a puddle, I also recognize that children love toys as well. Like, children flippin' love plastic toys, man. Like, they are a dream come true. And so my role as a parent is to provide heaps of opportunities to have a stick and a puddle, but to also provide room for them to play with the toys that they love without demonizing those toys or even giving any bad vibes about those toys at all. I want my kids to feel good about their wishes. And so that's also a really important thing to me. So some people are shocked when they come into my yurt and they see a lot of plastic. We got a lot of plastic. We really do. But I think that's a part of my parenting, and it's a value I hold really dear.
Well, you've mentioned this a couple of times in videos, but there is a difference between off-grid living and minimalism, and I think you certainly exemplify one of those ways more than the other, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. And the same with simple living. All these there's these beautiful movements towards minimalism and simple living that I think are really good and really healthy, because they call into question the extremely damaging consumerism that we have got ourselves into. This awful cycle where we are destroying the earth to create more stuff, and it's horrendous. And so these movements are really important and they're really beautiful, but it's also really important to hold all your values together and to figure out how all those values work in your family for all the people in your family. And I think that's a really important thing to do. So we don't buy anything new, but my children are experts at going into an op shop with their 50 cents and getting as many toys from the little old ladies as possible. They're pros at it.
Well, see, that's, I think, an important part of where not being minimalist is not the identical thing to being high consumption, because you certainly would not fall into that category, and that's very much been a part of your aesthetic probably forever, but since I've been reading the blog anyway in London, that is, and it comes back to kind of what I was hinting at with animism, that the way we conceive of objects in a materialist world is probably not correct, because they come invested with story and personality and background, and you get to sort of, I'm not justifying my own hoarding here, but you get to participate in part of that journey. So rather than buying the new thing, now this, well, I don't have a sewing machine, but now this object, this old pirate ship in a bottle has another life. It's kind of participating in it, and it's a really meditative is the wrong word. It's an interesting thought experiment to be around so many different things with different journeys. Like there's something about weaving story in assembling objects like that.
I totally agree. And our yurt is a humongous Bible-sized packet of stories of other people's stories that go back for possibly 100 years. And I love, love, love being surrounded by all of their stuff.
So actually, let's talk the yurt then. What even is a yurt for people who are listening, and why a yurt? And this is sort of a three-parter, because then I'd like to get to, and at what stage, tell the story of like making the decision of going, actually, I want to be permanent yurt rather than temporary yurt. So lay it on us.
Cool. So yurts originate in Mongolia, and actually the Mongolian phrase is a gur, and it's really important to acknowledge that because a yurt was the primary housing for the indigenous population of Mongolia, and then the Russian occupation called them yurts. So in an ideal world, I would call them gurs, but I kind of forget to do that. But I do think it's really important to recognize and honor the origins of something. So they originate in Mongolia. They are round and they have a lattice kind of thing that stretches out and curves around that you then join, and that makes the frame, it makes the walls, and then there are beams that go into a central point to make the roof, and then it's all covered by canvas. Traditionally they don't have windows, but they'll have a hole in the roof and a fire in the middle, and the smoke goes out the hole in the roof. But a few different companies have taken on yurts and kind of modernized them. So R2 have windows and doors and fireplaces towards the side rather than in the middle.
And the original one, it's my understanding, was a sort of model of the universe. So that's why one of the reasons the fire is in the middle and that you kind of have the hole at the top, and the general circular design. It has that sort of Eurasian shamanic map to it. Is that, I mean, we'll carry on with the yurt story in a sec, but I've watched a few videos on yurt living in general, and there seems to be something very different about living in a circular space.
I would say that's the fundamental difference of living in a yurt to living anywhere else, is the living in a circle or living in the round does something mystical to you. It just feels sacred, and so many people step into our yurts and they almost like kind of sigh or just kind of like release this tension. It's like they're just struck by the sacredness of a round room. Yeah, so that whole map is definitely still evident in how it makes you feel now, and it was definitely part of the draw for yurt living for us.
Had you tried them out in the year that you were kind of bus living in community? Did other people have yurts and you thought, well, maybe, and it was the general thinking like, well, we'll get a small yurt and build a house, and you know.
Yeah, we'd actually never come across yet. I don't even know if I'd seen them, or maybe I'd seen them like at a festival or something in the UK, but I'd never been in one. And then when we turned up at the community that I told you about, where they invited us to take our bus and stay for a while, one of their families had just moved out and left their yurt in situ, and they said, hey, why don't you kind of pull your bus a little bit closer and then live in the yurt for. We were like, okay, always up for, something different. And we actually laughed about it. And I can remember the blog post that I wrote that day. It was like, the title was, we're living in a Mongolian tent now. And the whole blog post was kind of just about, ha ha ha, how ridiculous are we that we now live in a Mongolian tent for a little while. And, we thought it might be just a few months until we found our own bit of land and didn't live in yurts. But actually, the more we spent time in that yurt, we realized that it really works for us. We really, really like it. It's beautiful and airy and round, and you can stand in the middle and have your voice echo back down at you. And you can wake up with a praying mantis on your nose because that is the feature of yurts too. But anyway, then the opportunity came up to buy our own little yurt, and we thought, let's do it. It's not a huge amount of money, and it will mean that we've always got somewhere we can live wherever we end up in New Zealand.
And you mentioned the praying mantis. That's one of the one of the questions I imagine I should probably ask, which is, what is the critter situation? I mean, what people should know is there aren't actually any snakes in New Zealand, but yurts in Australia. I know one of the questions is like, how do I stop this filling with snakes? But do you find that they're reasonably well sealed against critters, cheeky praying mantises notwithstanding?
Our little one is less so. Our little one definitely obviously sends out more of a welcome to creatures. So when we were living in that one, it was really common to have crickets and praying mantises and stick insects just kind of wander in and make themselves at home on the beams. So and that is the case today, even so. Like we have it on Airbnb, and as I was sweeping up last week, there were like maybe 10, I don't know what you call them. In England we call them granny bugs, and my husband, a Kiwi, calls them slaters, but they're those little
slaters,
grey.
yeah, that's the Australian term. There you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, so there were like 10 in there, and I was like, oh man, this is kind of gross if you're just coming for a little Airbnb holiday. But it is actually just the nature of those little yurts. This big yurt is slightly more kind of closed up. There's a kind of wooden rim that goes along the bottom that I think would stop snakes. I'm not really that sure. Like, I have to Google that, Australian.
Yeah. So what was the decision-making process to around scaling up the yurt? Like when you bought the first one, the smaller one, it was, and I think that's quite a good idea, because I know a lot of people who've invested in smaller yurts think that as well. It's like, well, now I can basically live anywhere.
Yeah.
What was the decision at some point to go, actually, I'm quite into this. Maybe we don't necessarily need the house thing. Maybe we just scale up the yurt.
Yeah. Sometimes I think mine and Tim's life is basically just a case of bumbling along and then knocking into something and saying yes to it. Sometimes it feels like that, but really maybe what we're doing is dreaming big and making things happen purely by our dreams. I'm not sure, but that is what seemed to happen with getting this big year. We had bought this land, so we'd been a year on the other farm. We'd decided to buy land with this other family. We'd found the land, it was perfect. We bought it, but we still had 9 months before we could move on. And in that 9 months, a big yurt came on Trade Me, which is the New Zealand version of eBay. And we were just sort of like, hey, look, there's a big yurt on Trade Me. Shall we get it? Okay, let's get it. And then we got it. And that's kind of how that happened.
Yeah, that's one of the kind of funny twists of fate. So that happened after you found the land.
Yeah, so we'd already bought the land. And so we, to be fair to ourselves, we had done a lot of costing, and we'd been to see an architect to get an idea of how much money it would cost us to build a really beautiful, very earth-friendly, kind of permaculture-based home. And the figure he gave us was just so stratospheric to us. It was just kind of in another universe. We couldn't even imagine spending that on a home. And then we started costing up what it would take to get a little old beautiful villa. There's these gorgeous villas in New Zealand. I'm sure you have them in Aussie too, but just colonial, gorgeous villas. We started costing up bringing that onto the land, and even that then seemed kind of like crazy money. And so then when we saw this yurt on Trade Me, and even doubling it for the subfloor and the floorboards and the outhouse and the deck, made it far more within our price range. And then, of course, we started, speaking to each other about how much we love living in a yurt. and how amazing having one big open space would be. And we started Googling big yurts, and we went to visit some friends who had exactly the same big yurt. And that visit especially made us go, wow, we could totally do this. It is a proper home. It is not like living in a tent. And then I think that the next day we went and bought a big yurt on Trade Me.
Nice. And what are the things you've done to pimp your yurt so that, as you say, it's not living in a tent now that it's a house? You mentioned that it's on a platform. I mean, is the kitchen in the yurt? What about the bathroom and so on? How do you go from I've bought a nomadic tent on Kiwi eBay, and I'm going to turn that into a home? Like, how is it pimped?
So we went to, in true style of ours, we went to the landfill shop, which is called the Seagull Centre. It is worth visiting New Zealand just to go to the Seagull Centre. They pull everything out of the landfill and sell it to you. And as you can imagine, me and Tim are in heaven there. The only way it could be better would be if they would let us pull it out of the landfill ourselves. So we went there and we got the old doctor surgery from the town, all of the furniture from that. So we bought that in, and all those old wooden filing cabinets is what makes our kitchen. So that's inside the yurt. It isn't like a normal kitchen. It looks like, a whole bunch of doctor surgery filing cabinets painted turquoise of color that is far too bright, but it wasn't the same as what the swab told me it would look like. But anyway, so we have an indoor kitchen, and our bathroom is outside, but it has hot water. So that is a major pimp. That's awesome. And we also built a mezzanine, which involved building a quarter of the floor again, but on top of the floor, and then getting over like 15 friends and a whole bunch of pallets, and then slowly raising it and then building the structure underneath it. So that's how we got our mezzanine up. It was really fun and very, very Kiwi. And I thought, if this goes on the internet, there will be an outcry. What else have we done? I'm just looking around. We've got a lot of things in here that we bought from our London home, actually. A lot of the old crockery that I couldn't leave in London, and a few other blankets that we got from car boot sales around our Europe trip.
The land your two yurts are currently on, how did you find it, and what was it about the place, and what do you hope to do with it?
So it's kind of a funny thing, looking for land, particularly if you're not exactly sure what your priorities are, what you want to do on it. So we turned up in New Zealand, and we started looking immediately, and we first off started looking for half an acre in a town or just outside of a town that we could do with ourselves. And then as we lived more on that farm, we began to realize that actually this kind of living needs more of you. Like, it needs to be a team effort. It would be really hard to do it as just one young family. So then things started to change, and we started to look wider. We still hadn't really quite decided that we were definitely going to live with another family, but we were looking for bigger pieces just in case. And as somebody mentioned, this little bit of land by a river in the Karangahaki Gorge, and our ears perked up. It was at a New Year's Eve party. And we're like, oh, that does sound pretty amazing. And then the next day we were really tired, but we felt that we probably needed a swim. So we Googled swimming in Karangahaki, not because we were thinking about the land, but just because it was quite close to where we were at that time. And we came across this place that was the place that everybody swims here in Karangahaki. So as we drove down, we saw a real estate sign on a piece of land for 10 acres for 400,000. And Tim went, oh, I think that might be the place they were talking about last night. And we noted it, and we thought, I guess that's kind of reasonable, like 10 acres on a river for 400,000. And then we kept on driving, went to the swimming hole, did a walk along the river. And as we walked along the river, we were looking at the piece of land and we were like, wow, it's right on a river. And it's right at the base of the mountain. That is a really cool piece of land. And then as we drove home, we looked at the sign outside the gate again, and it was actually 10 hectares. And we were like, whoa, that is massive. So we went home and we said to our friends, guys, will you come with us and look at this piece of land? It's like right on the river and it's huge and it looks pretty cool. And so literally the next day, we met the real estate on the land, and it was like we just walked down the drive and the sun came out and bathed everything in gold. And we were like, this is the place. And we all just knew. And as we kept walking, little things, the real estate guy kept saying little things that we were like, wow, that's awesome. So he told us about there being springs on the land, which is really important for off-grid living. And we were basically like, at the end of that visit, we were like, let's do it. It's going to happen. Let's push this through. And it was kind of funny because it had been on the market for 8 years. And every time we go to a party, everybody's like, oh, yeah, we looked at that piece of land. And nobody bought it. It was very strange. And so I was like, Tim, don't worry, don't panic. It's been on the market for 8 years. We don't need to, ruin the summer just signing things and getting paperwork together. And he was like, but we got to do it. We got to do it. And then we did it and we signed it all off and it made it happen. And then the next day, people who live next door to this bit of land called the people who sold it to us up and gave them a cash offer for the bit of land. And the people who sold it to us were like, guys, we literally sold it yesterday. And that's the story about this land. We feel like it was meant to be.
Definitely. It clearly was. I mean, that, and it's interesting that you got the larger yurt once that process had begun and so on. You look at it and go, I don't know too many people who I speak to who live in kind of, I don't even want to call it non-traditional, because, you have almost 150,000 years of humans living closer to the way you live than the way I live.
Yeah.
So I don't know anyone who is in a situation similar to yours that hasn't had like the weird hand of destiny just rearranging stuff and letting you know it. And I think the letting you know it bit is the phone call the very next day. That's sort of like, wink,
yeah,
this
totally.
is, you have picked up the signs correctly
Totally.
and this is where you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
Could we turn that into advice to people? Because I know it's kind of the discussion of the hour, particularly amongst US listeners, how people can, given what's going on and so on, and even without that, just generally semi-grid their lives. Can we turn that into a piece of advice, which sounds weird until it happens to you, but like follow the signs? Is that a legitimate thing to say for people who are going to go on this journey?
So I think follow the signs, but the signs only become clear to you when you are really in touch with yourself. And I really find that so strongly in my own life that when I have a really good kind of internal practice, so that might be a spiritual practice for some people. For me at the moment, mostly it just is to do with my writing, and it involves journaling every single morning. And when I get that internal process right, things become so clear to me. It is like signs. And it's like I have this deep instinctual voice that I am really able to listen to. But if I'm not being kind of really onto it with my practice, that voice is hard to listen to and isn't as strong, and I kind of find things a lot more confusing and a lot less things fall into place. So that is a kind of strange mystical thing to say when you're talking about how to go off grid. But I think it's a really important one. I think the whole reason you might want to go off grid is about living in connection with nature. And I think that true connection with nature is also true on being connected to yourself and making a lot of room, a lot of space to listen to the voice deep inside, the voice that humankind has actually been able to listen to forever until quite recently. Take the time to listen to that voice and do what you need to do to have those moments of clarity.
And speaking of, is there because you mentioned you're a writer, and we're going to talk about that in a sec, but have you found that sort of being able to listen to that voice and thus have the signs kind of unfold because you're, to describe it in another way, like more properly aligned, for instance, that's an easier process. Like there's a sort of force multiplier effect of living the way you do. I mean, has it been good for your creativity to have listened to that and now find yourself where you are?
Yeah, definitely. I'm learning so much. Even I've been basically writing in a way for work for about 7 years, and I've been freelance as a writer for 4 years, but I'm still learning so much about the things I need to do. And one of the things that I need to do is have heaps of downtime, and that downtime involves getting off the internet for as long as possible, and it involves giving myself a chance to just sit there and stare into space. And it involves, when I go to feed the ducks in the forest, feeding them and then taking a few more steps into the forest and just sitting down in the forest and staring at the sunlight on a leaf and not doing anything at all, not even consciously meditating or doing anything awesome, but just doing nothing. When I give myself the time to do that, my creativity is about tenfold. It's unreal. I then sit down to write, and I feel like I've got stories to tell, and words come out of me that I haven't really decided to come out. And sometimes I get really busy and caught up with the need to make money for my family and do, and I forget to have that downtime. And I feel like that's when all my work just totally lacks life completely.
That's brilliant. That's well, speaking of, I guess, creativity and writing and your output, Lucy, for people who want to know more, because this has been just like the most amazing discussion, and I've learned a lot, and I found this really, really fascinating stuff. But for people who want to know more, where do they go to find out about like your books and your blog and your hugely compelling videos?
So everything is on my website, which is called Lulastic and the Hippie Shake. You can just Google that, or you can go to LULASTIC. Lulastic. It's a stupid name. It's ridiculous. I don't know why I ever called it that. Lulastic.co.uk. So everything is on my website. You can find my blogs there and my YouTube videos there and my books there. I've tried to put it all in a kind of tidy front page, but I don't know if that's really effective or not. And just yesterday I launched my Patreon page, so it feels like a really big new step for me. Hopefully it means I don't have to do soul destroying advertising and stuff. It means I can have that creative freedom to really focus on the stuff that's important to me, which is creating resources about loving the earth and respecting children. So that is Patreon/Lulastic.
Fantastic.
Yeah, again.
Yeah. And this will, of course, all be linked up in the show notes in all the various places. But this is my first time speaking to someone recording in a yurt. So thank you very much. It's been
such a pleasure.
Absolutely. It's been an amazing discussion.
Thank you. I've loved it.
There we go. Found objects, following signs, the art of making, and off-grid living in the round. Now, these sorts of discussions fascinate me for two key reasons. First, it's just interesting and inspiring to see the proliferation of lifeways that differ from the post-war suburban model that are available, today. And second, neither I nor I'd wager you know anyone who's gone down this path that hasn't experienced the strange hand of fate that follows along once those first tentative steps are made. And in a way, that's very validating for those who live according to more intuitive modes, which is probably quite a number of us. And speaking of validating, please validate the show, probably the weirdest segue yet, by subscribing in your favorite podcatcher or on iTunes. Head on over to runesoup.com or the Runesoup Facebook page and say hi, and or find me on Twitter, where I am Gordon, Gordon_White, WHITE. Until next time.